Hi, I'm Caroline, a yoga teacher with a special interest in menopause based in Edinburgh.
And hi, I'm Dr. Claire, a GP with a special interest in menopause based in North London.
So, we thought we would share some breathing techniques this week after our interview with Dr. Ella Manga last week. Some techniques that could be really, really helpful to reduce stress, that feeling of overwhelm for many women who suffer from anxiety. But we're also at the end of another year, and we're recording this on Wednesday, the 22nd of December. So for those who do celebrate Christmas, we hope that you're able to gather with family and friends. And for those who don't, this can be still a very challenging time coming towards the end of a year, the darker days, and sometimes just tying up loose ends at work. Dr. Claire, how's your week been, or this year end been for you?
Yeah, it's been a tough year, hasn't it? It's been a tough year for us all, with restrictions and case numbers and trying to manage, I think. But actually, I think if we can just take a few moments to remind ourselves of the importance of our mental well-being, not just at this time of year, but also generally and especially through the perimenopause and menopause, I think we can really pick up some useful tools to help us when we are stressed or anxious or having those symptoms which we've discussed before.
So I thought I'd share some breathing techniques, which Dr. Claire's going to join in with as well. And breathing is it's just a huge part of a yoga practice. And after speaking to Dr. Ella last week, she mentioned Sitali and Sitkari breath, a cooling breath, which we'll go over again in this episode. But just a little bit more about how the breath can hack our nervous system.
Tell me what that means. What does hacking the nervous system mean?
So, actually, as estrogen fluctuates or drops, we can have adrenaline surges, and that's a stress hormone as such. But it's not all bad. It's just it can become a little bit more apparent as our all hormones fluctuate. And the autonomic nervous system is often described as the rest and digest and the flight and fright side. So rest and digest kind of does what it says. Hopefully when we're feeling rested, restful, calm, that's the part of the nervous system we're in. And our body functions work really very well, our body systems. So that's the side when our digestion is working really well, our sleep is working really well, everything's quite calm so the body can relax and do what it needs to do. When we're in the flight and fright side of the nervous system, this is the sympathetic nervous system, it's not all bad. And this is something I like to really begin to explain because it's described as fight and flight because often when we're stressed, we're busy, we get a surprise or a shock, we jump, we're in that side of the nervous system. But also we need to be in this side of the nervous system to do any sort of activity. So going for a run, getting out of bed, just generally working, that's the side of the nervous system we come into. So it's not all bad. It's just that if we're switched on to this side of the nervous system for long periods of time and can't get back to the rest and digest side of the nervous system, that's when we get into a little bit of trouble. And often this is driven by our hormones. And this can obviously affect our sleep, can affect that feeling of overwhelm, of anxiety, which can just show up as being a little bit unsure about yourself, just having self-doubt, and just that general feeling of feeling stressed,
Mm.
which many women do suffer from, don't they, Claire?
Yeah, and I think it's one of these symptoms, as we've mentioned before, that the psychological symptoms of the menopause often creep up on us. Sometimes they're not, sometimes they don't, sometimes they're just suddenly there, but often they creep up on us all of a sudden. So they may start as just feeling slightly overwhelmed, but actually that can quickly progress to symptoms of feeling so anxious that you're unable to kind of go about your daily task. And it's such a common symptoms that's reported in the menopause. And if we can hack the the nervous system, then obviously we can give you tools to help and skills to help you try and relieve some of those stresses and strains. We know that estrogen has a really important function and a really important role in the brain. We know that it's full of estrogen receptors that help to support your cognitive brain function. And so actually we know that with estrogen deficiency or fluctuations, obviously we're not going to replace those, but if we can in a way bypass them, then perhaps we've got something there that we can use just for those times when you're feeling stretched, as it were, or anxious. And I think that's really timely at this time of the year, not just because of the pandemic, but just because it's busy for many people, finishing up work and having to deal with family and, you know, wrapping presents, and it becomes stressful.
It does, and actually you mentioned cognitive function as well, and breathing techniques can really help with brain fog, actually, kind of bring a sense of clarity and calm. And also menorrhage as well, you know, something I suffer from, that kind of sudden feeling of heat and anger arising. And actually if we have the tools that can help us with many of these symptoms that we can just draw upon, then actually we can help ourselves quite easily. Often with all these breathing techniques, it takes a bit of practice, so it's not just going to fix everything immediately. A daily practice is ideal, even just for 5 minutes. And then actually your body, your brain gets used to kind of switching it on when you're needed, or when it's needed, I should say. So I thought I'd briefly go over the Sitali and Sakari breath that Dr. Ella Manger had mentioned last week. She talked through it very briefly last week, and that was really, really helpful. But this is a cooling breath and can be really, really helpful if you suffer from hot flushes, night sweats, but also that kind of heat of menorrhage. This can really help that as well. Now, for some of us, we are not genetically predisposed to being able to curl our tongue. And when I say curl our tongue, it's almost like we're rolling it in and creating a straw-like shape with our tongue. So for those who can't do that, you can breathe in and out through your teeth. So we'll begin with the teeth one, because it's something that everybody can access quite easily. And it's almost as if you smile. Your jaw isn't clenched, but your teeth are softly together. And you're breathing in through your mouth. So it's a soft jaw, soft smile, and teeth are almost together, trying to avoid clenching the jaw. So we're always trying to avoid creating any tension in the jaw or stressing this area, and breathing in through the mouth. So it's almost as if you're breathing in through the teeth as well. And you'll notice as you breathe in, it's quite cooling, because the breath in, or the inhalation, is hitting the saliva or the sort of moisture in your mouth. That's cooling immediately, and you can breathe out through your nose. So that's something to practice for a couple of minutes, obviously always stopping with any of these breathing techniques if they feel uncomfortable. If you are able to curl your tongue, that is the other option, and you quite literally curl your tongue into the shape of a straw. It will pop out of your mouth so you can actually see your tongue. And you're going to begin to breathe in through the straw-like shape you've created with the tongue. And breathe out through your nose. And you will have heard the sound on this recording. As you breathe in through your tongue, it almost slows the breath down a little bit because you're breathing in through the straw. But again, it's the same concept. Your inhalation is hitting the moisture of your tongue. Therefore, it's very cooling, and you're breathing out through your nose softly, gently, slowly. With all these breathing techniques, it's really helpful to either be standing, so you have a sort of soft, relaxed posture, sitting in a comfortable position, ideally with your hips level with or higher than your knees, and I'll explain that in a moment. But making sure you feel comfortable, supported and relaxed. You can do them lying down as well, obviously.
And how long would you do, say, you know, how long would you do that cooling breath for? Would it be, you know, is there a minimum amount that you'd expect to see a benefit? I mean, obviously we know it's a skill you've got to learn, and it's not going to be for everybody, but is there a way that you can just sort of say, well, this is 5 minutes of this and that's all I'm going to do?
Yeah, I mean, ideally 3 to 5 minutes, but again, it depends on each person. And actually, you know, if you've got a hot flush arising in a meeting, it's quite difficult to say, sorry, I'm just going to come into my breathing technique. Yeah. So maybe you're able to visualize something instead. You know, maybe you're able to visualize an ice cube in your mouth, or you can visualize standing in some cool water, which is another really helpful kind of meditation technique. But yeah, 3 to 5 minutes. But again, again, it's building up to that, because these techniques are often new for women, and so taking some time to practice them as you can, and practice them standing making a cup of tea. Practice them if you're standing in a queue, as long as nobody can see you, you don't mind, because actually it's these little moments where we're not really doing anything, where often we're just looking at our phone sometimes, that we can practice these techniques and they become part of our tools, our toolkit. And it's just having that toolkit to use. Something else that's really, really helpful actually is just very simply coming to a very soft, light breathing technique. And this is something to just slow the breath down. It's going to immediately calm the nervous system. So come into that hack that I was talking about, and slow the breath, calm your nervous system down. So to begin with, for this, it's really helpful to be seated. If that's not possible, obviously lying down, and if possible, having your knees bent, feet flat on the floor, so a semi-supine shape. But if you are seated on the floor, making sure you're sitting on something, whether you're kneeling or sitting cross-legged, because we want the hips to be level with or higher than the knees. And this is to allow your hips and your hip flexors, muscles just around the hips, to relax, to soften. And in turn, the belly is able to rise and fall with ease. If our knees are up by our waist, then the belly can't expand, and it's going to change the breath or restrict the breath. And we have something called the diaphragm, which is just underneath the rib cage, and it kind of mirrors that lowest part of the rib cage. It's like a dome shape, and it's the primary muscle of our breath. So basically what that means is it should be doing most of the breath work, about 75% of the breath work. And it's assisted by the abdominal muscles, which we're all familiar with, and the intercostal muscles. And these are the muscles that run kind of in between the ribs and the rib cage, around that area. So we want the diaphragm to work well, but often with our postures and just kind of sitting over desks, slouching, our diaphragm can get a little bit weak. So actually sitting tall, but with the hips a little higher than the knees or level with the knees, is going to help this diaphragmatic breath. So if you'd like to join at this point, please do take a comfortable seat and find a sense of softness in your shoulders. So with everything we do with our breathing, we want to have a sense of ease, a sense of tension softening. So if you feel like you're holding anything, are you able to allow that to soften a bit? And if not, perhaps you do come to lying down. And with breathing, we try and breathe in and out through our nose. So there's a few reasons for this. It's actually the most efficient way to breathe. It slows our breath down naturally. It's got a little further to travel towards the lungs. But we've got nasal hairs in our nose, and those nasal hairs catch any dust, any pollution, anything we don't want to enter our lungs. And then we've got the blood vessels on the inside of the nostrils. So they are going to warm your inhalation up, ready for the lungs to receive. So if you breathe in through your mouth, or you've ever done that on a very cold day, you will have noticed your breath or your lungs get a little bit of a shock. So breathing in through the nose warms your breath, ready for the lungs. And we also now know that if we breathe in through our nose and out through our nose, while nasal breathing, pockets of nitric oxide form. And actually these pockets of nitric oxide are cleansing. So it's antimicrobial, it's antibacterial. So we're actually cleansing our inhalation before it reaches our lung. So there's a few things going on there as to why we breathe in and out through our nose. But that is why. And if you're not used to breathing in and out through your nose, it can take a little bit of practice. But we should be doing this all day, every day. It's one of the most efficient ways to breathe and healthiest ways to breathe through our body systems. So if you are joining in, beginning to breathe in and out through your nose, and trying to invite a sense of softness and ease in your body, just making sure you feel comfortable where you are. And as you breathe in and out through your nose, is it possible to begin to encourage your breath to travel down? So as you inhale, it's as if your breath is travelling down your spine to the base of your spine. It may be more helpful to take your hands on the lowest part of your rib cage, so you can feel the last 2 or 3 ribs, and use your hands to direct your breath. If you're sitting up, have your elbows tucked in. There's a little bit less effort for shoulders. Breathing in and directing your inhalation to your hands. So we're beginning to encourage our breath to travel deeper. And you may begin to notice your ribcage moving more prominently. So a sense of your ribcage expanding upwards and outwards in that kind of 360-degree motion. So it's expanding the front, side, and the back of the body as your lungs receive the inhalation, and gently shrinking back as you exhale. Taking a break at any point if you need to. And perhaps if you were using your hands to guide your breath, you allow them to rest for a moment. You might like to come back to the visualization of your breath, your inhalation traveling down your spine, your exhalation traveling back up. And take a moment to notice if your tongue is resting. So perhaps your tongue is active. It's in contact with the top of your mouth. Is it possible to soften and release into your jaw? Allow your tongue to rest in the lower part of your mouth. And notice if that changes anything. And then in your own time, beginning to allow that to soften, let go of that breathing technique, and just taking a moment to see how you feel. So we weren't even there concentrating on our breath for 5 minutes. I think it was a bit shorter than that, but hopefully a sense of calm and peace with a really simple breathing technique.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful because not only are you concentrating on breathing, what you're doing is you're kind of joining that with just pausing, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly. It's actually just stopping in the moment. And it doesn't matter where we are at on our perimenopause or menopause journey. I think as women, we are often very busy. We're taking on quite a lot, caring roles, perhaps for children, for partners, for parents, for everybody else, and not always taking care of ourselves. So taking those few minutes for ourselves can be incredibly beneficial.
And I think that calming down of the nervous system, that just taking 5 minutes just to stop and to almost check out a little bit is so important, because it can, just in those few moments, reduce your anxiety level, focus your mind on something completely different. And even if that, like you say, even if that's a couple of minutes, that's a couple of minutes that you've sort of carved out for yourself, and touching base with how you're feeling.
Absolutely. And our respiratory rate is actually affected by our stress. So we tend to breathe faster and shallower if we're stressed, we're busy, we're feeling a bit overwhelmed or anxious. And so the breath moves into the upper body, so the upper kind of couple of, in the upper chest, I should say. And then we're using on our secondary respiratory muscles, which are basically kind of around the neck and upper body area. And if we're using those more, we get tighter in the upper body, the chest, the shoulders, the neck. And it's kind of a vicious cycle. And we just can't get out of that vicious cycle. So we're breathing shallower and we're getting more anxious and more kind of stressed about everything and anything, just partly because our breath work isn't slow, isn't deep, isn't efficient. And efficient breathing, so slowly in and out through our nose, can nurture all our body systems. So everything from the cardiovascular system, so the heart, to the respiratory, obviously our breathing, to the endocrine system, which is all hormones, the digestive system. When we breathe slowly, softly, in a relaxed breath, our digestive system is working best. And also the lymphatic system as well. So, with the respiratory rate affected by stress, if we can slow this down, then immediately we can calm our whole body down and allow it to function really, really well. So we'll take a break there, and after these messages from our sponsors, we'll come back to another breathing technique.
UK Health the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Welcome back to the Menopause Sisters show on UK Health Radio, and today we are practicing some breathing techniques. We spoke to Dr. Ella Manga last week, a breathing expert, and she helpfully explained the importance of breath work, the importance of breathing well. We thought today we share some different breathing techniques that might help you. And there isn't one breathing technique that will help everybody. You'll be drawn to certain breathing techniques more than others. So it's finding a technique that helps you, that you can practice regularly and use as a tool and have in your toolbox. Dr. Claire, I know you really enjoy the breathing when we do our workshops together. You find that the most helpful, don't you?
I do. I think it's because, again, like we were saying before, it makes you stop. So actually you're not only just using the cooling breath and mindful breathing, you're actually allowing yourself to, like anything, when you're concentrating on one thing, it forces you to stop. And I think that's really helpful to do, particularly when you're feeling stressed or anxious. If you can, often that's quite hard in the moment, but if you can bring your mind back to that 3 to 5 minutes of breath work, I think it really does reinforce good mental wellness.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And actually just slowing the breath down is incredibly helpful. And we know now, science now tells us that actually around 5 to 6 breaths a minute is ideal. So we actually tend to, as humans, overbreathe or breathe too much. So if you would like to get an idea of your breathing rate, you can just time yourself for a minute, sitting, standing, breathing in and out, and just noticing how many breaths you take in a minute. Generally, people tend to breathe a little bit more than that, 8 to 12 breaths, maybe even higher. But actually beginning to slow your breath down, it gives the body time to absorb the oxygen. And we won't have time to go into the science and biology today, but actually what we're looking for is a very particular ratio of carbon dioxide to oxygen. Something called the Bohr effect. For those who'd like to Google it, it's B-O-H-R. And to have that ratio means the tissues, the blood in the tissues, can absorb the oxygen very well. So the second technique is just really very much about slowing the breath down. The first one was about engaging our diaphragm, so our primary respiratory muscle, and that in turn helps slow the breath down, but making sure we're taking a deep breath, making sure that the breath was travelling to the lowest parts of the lungs, which is actually where most of the gas exchange takes place. This technique is about slowing the breath down. And once again, just a word of caution that actually if at any point it feels uncomfortable, you suffer from high blood pressure, or you have any heart issues, please do contact your doctor and just check in with them before you practice this. If you have a feeling of air hunger, which is really likely as you slow your breath down, this feeling of needing to take a deep breath, pause, stop, and come back to some regular breathing, your breathing, and then give it another go, because it can take a little bit of time to get used to this feeling of slowing the breath down. So once again, taking a comfortable seat, finding a sense of calm, sense of comfort, whether you're lying down, seated. Again, making sure your hips are level with your knees or a little bit higher, so allowing the diaphragm to move, to work with your breath, and your belly to expand. And as you do so, beginning to connect with your breath. And simply by that I mean notice your breath. So we're breathing in and out through the nose if possible. And beginning to just notice your breath. Perhaps you begin to notice the cooler air as you breathe in and the warmer air as you breathe out. And as you do so, are you able to soften your jaw area? So perhaps that's resting your tongue in the lower part of your mouth. If you feel quite tense, we often do hold tension in our jaw area. You might like to gently open your mouth wide, almost like a pretend yawn, releasing through the jaw area. beginning to slow your breath down. So this might feel as if hardly any air is entering your nostrils. So your breath is beginning to become very soft, almost invisible. If a visualization is helpful, you could imagine that you have a feather just below your nose, and that feather is hardly moving as you breathe in and out through your nostrils. Taking a break if you need to, checking in with your jaw, your mouth, making sure it's soft. And if the feeling of air hunger occurs, that feeling of needing to take a deep breath, then just pausing, taking a slightly deeper breath and coming back. Softly, very light. If your mind wanders, drawing your focus back to the breath, that sensation of hardly any air passing in and out through your nostrils. And in your own time, beginning to let that technique go, coming back to your natural breathing rhythm rate. And taking this moment to acknowledge how you feel. It might have felt a little bit of a challenge, slowing your breath down. For some, you may have noticed a sense of calm, sense of quiet. So there isn't any right or wrong way to feel after any of these breathing techniques. There's a sense of hopefully finding one that supports you to feel relatively calm, relatively at ease. And as we slow the breath down, so it's a kind of sense of lightening the breath, making it really soft, really, really slow, that's a really helpful one to come to, particularly in the evening if you suffer from insomnia. So if you find it really hard to get to sleep, slowing the breath down can be really, really helpful. So getting into bed actually, getting comfy, and then coming to inhaling and exhaling through the nose as softly and lightly as you can. And often that is where you just nod off and without thinking about it. And we were playing there again with the improving oxygen uptake, but also getting the body used to carbon dioxide. And so if you did experience the air hunger, that feeling of needing to take a deep breath, that was just the body going, oh, I can just feel quite a lot of carbon dioxide in my body. I just feel like I need to take a deeper breath and get some oxygen. Now, actually, it's a kind of myth that we don't need carbon dioxide. We need the right ratio of carbon dioxide to oxygen for the uptake of oxygen into the blood and the tissues. So it's by slowing the breath down, that's what we're doing with. We're increasing our tolerance of carbon dioxide and therefore a more efficient transfer of oxygen, more efficient breath. So that's another technique that's really helpful. And you can layer on the first technique we came to, or the second actually I should say, the diaphragmatic technique, perhaps the hands on the rib cage, or visualizing the breath traveling up and down the spine. And those two together can be really, really beneficial as well. But with each one, it's worth just practicing and taking a bit of time to get used to them and finding the one that resonates best with you.
Yeah, I think it's really incredible how just a simple technique can calm you down. You're right. It's a skill, isn't it? It takes a little bit of time to really control that breath and to stop your mind wandering, but also allowing yourself to say that's okay if my mind's wandered, but bring it back. And
yeah, it's I've been practicing breathing for 25 years and my mind still wanders off. I don't know if it's picking up on the recording. I got a tree surgeon outside this morning, so my mind was wandering there for a moment, going, "Please turn off that drill." But actually, that's fine. You'll hear things around you, and one of the key things about focusing on the breath is how can you shut out those sounds around you? Perhaps what you can see, and sometimes closing the eyes is really helpful because you can begin to focus inwards a little more. You can really begin to focus on the sensations of your breath, and actually just slowing the breath down or focusing on the breath is going to help with cognitive function. It's going to help improve your focus, particularly if you're suffering from lethargy as well, you're feeling particularly tired. So it's not so much just about anxiety or menorrhage or feeling that sense of overwhelm. It can help so many different elements and support so many different symptoms. I know we've mentioned before.
I actually find that if you're counting breaths as well, sometimes when you're first starting out, if you're counting breaths in and out, actually that's quite calming, and it also brings your mind back to breathing, and because you're sort of semi-concentrating on something, and then as you become more aware of your breath and you get better at being able to just take those 3 to 5 minutes purely to control your breathing, you might need to do that less, but I find also that quite calming as well, being able to...
Yeah, and actually just choosing a number, maybe you've only got a minute, so you're going to go, right, I'm only going to count 10 breaths, for you just between patients. Perhaps you've got 2 minutes, you go, right, I'm going to count 20 breaths. I'm going to just try and slow my breath down. I'm going to count 20. That can be really, really helpful as well. So it's just beginning to find these little techniques and work in with your day. I mean, that's the other thing. Often we're just busy. It's obviously making the time for yourself and saying, right, I've got to prioritize myself here and just take this time. But even if it's only just a minute, that can be incredibly beneficial.
Yeah, and actually that what you're doing by doing that is taking back a bit of control, aren't you? You're saying that I'm in control of this moment, and I can make this change regardless of everything else that's going on around me.
Yeah, and I think we've talked about, HRT for many women, they've gone down the HRT route. It's really helped, but it's not solved everything. It isn't that one quick fix. And so it's just finding the other elements, whether that is nutrition, whether that's CBT, cognitive behavioural therapy, maybe it's some supplements, sort of herbs I'm talking about, and aromatherapy, or perhaps it's just breathing to support alleviating the symptoms that HRT are maybe not helping. And what I love about breathing is it's free. We have it. It's always with us. So it's about using it to the best benefit for us, really.
Harness its power. It's innate, isn't it? So you've got to harness what you've got and make the best of it.
Yeah, it's free. We've always got our breath. So if we can begin to focus on that and actually breathe efficiently, breathe well, and manipulate it and control it to help us and alleviate symptoms, then, we've got this wonderful tool. So we'll take another break there and listen to some messages from our sponsors, and we'll be right back with another breathing technique. You're listening to the Menopause Sisters on UK Health Radio.
UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good. UK Health Radio, the station that makes you feel good.
Welcome back to the Menopause Sisters on UK Health Radio, and today we are talking you through some breathing techniques after talking to Dr. Elamanga, a breathwork expert last week. So as a yoga teacher, breathwork is an integral part of a yoga practice and my classes as well. And actually I teach a lot of breathwork and breathing classes. And so we're just beginning to focus on different breathing techniques that can support and help alleviate symptoms. And we were just saying before the break, Claire, weren't we, that actually it's really helpful because we always have it. It's something that's not going to cost you anything. It's just going to take a little bit of time to practice. So this last breathing technique I'd like to share with you for this episode today is something that I learned from Robin Rothenberg, and it's called halo breathing. And one of the reasons I wanted to share that today is we are in December. So for those who celebrate Christmas or are aware of Christmas festivities, I feel like we're surrounded by angels and halos at this time of year, whether it's decorations or images. And it's a really, really helpful technique if you found the kind of slowing the breath down and diaphragmatic breath just a little bit challenging. This is a really good one maybe to come to. It felt quite timely to practice this today. Once again, trying to find a comfortable seat. And as I mentioned before, we want to have the knees level with or lower than the hips. And this is to allow our bellies to expand, rise and fall with our breath. So we know that's working well. So whether you're seated in a chair or seated on the floor, making sure you feel comfortable, and maybe you're sitting on something if you're sitting on the floor to elevate your hips a little. And this is a breathing technique that needs to be done seated because we're going to begin to gently move our head. So taking your time perhaps to soften and release through the jaw. Maybe that means allowing your tongue to rest in the lower part of the jaw. Perhaps it's a gentle opening of the mouth wide, a pretend yawn, as you release through the mouth. Softening shoulders, you may like to take a couple of shoulder rolls. And beginning to breathe in and out through your nose. And as with all the breathing techniques, if at any point it feels uncomfortable or you need to take a mouth breath, please do. And you may like to take one hand on your heart center of your chest, and one hand around the solar plexus area, so right at the bottom of the rib cage, just above your navel. Beginning to focus on the sensation of your breath in your nostrils, so making it soft, making it light. Checking in with your jaw, making sure your tongue is still soft, is still relaxed. Then beginning to become aware of the crown of your head, so that center point at the top of your head. And using that point to softly circle, almost to trace the halo that you can visualize above your head. Softly, slowly tracing the shape of a halo just above your head. Taking 5 to 6 movements in one direction, and then 5 to 6 movements in the other direction, and then resting. Perhaps your eyes are closed, or maybe you've softened your gaze. A very soft, gentle circling movement. If at any point you feel dizzy, you might like to try it with your eyes open. And if that doesn't help, you could simply visualize your head following the halo without taking the movement. As you take rest, coming to repeat it just one more time. Making sure your jaw feels soft, you still feel at ease. and gently circling to trace your halo. Making sure you change directions after 5 to 6 rotations. And just checking your breath is still flowing in and out through your nostrils. And then finishing once you've taken those 5 to 6 rotations in the opposite direction. And taking a moment to acknowledge how you feel. Noticing if you feel a little calmer, more at peace. And perhaps nothing's changed, and knowing that's okay as well. Not all these breathing techniques will resonate with everybody. And maybe one direction, moving in one direction, following the halo one direction, felt more comfortable than another. So what we were there doing there with focusing on the halo was beginning to form a kind of subtle breath, a soft breath, a calming effect on the breath. And actually, if you find it quite difficult to reduce your breathing rate or slow down the breath, this can be really, really helpful. So we've run through a few different techniques today. We've done the Sitali and Sakari breath. Sitali was the one where we curl our tongue, use our tongue as a straw. For those that are unable to do that, it's just a genetic thing. We invited you to breathe in and out through your mouth, kind of through your teeth. That was a cooling breath, helping with hot flushes, helping with night sweats, helping with menorrhage as well. And then we came to diaphragmatic breathing. We took a moment to focus on using the diaphragm well and efficient breath in and out through the nose. And then we began to find a light breath, so reducing the speed of our breath and trying to focus on slowing our breath down to sort of something around 5 to 6 breaths a minute. And then this final breath, halo breathing, that I learned from Robin Rothenberg. Really helpful, soothing, calming breathing technique. And actually, as you gently circle your head, mirroring the image of a halo, and you change direction, that's going to help improve your focus, because anything we do on one side, we try and do on the other in yoga. And actually, that's when our brain, our cognitive function is challenged, because often we're used to doing something in one direction or with one hand. You know, if you're right-handed, you're more likely to use your right hand, and that can really help with brain fog as well. So a few different techniques today, just to try, and if one in particular resonated, taking that one away with you and practicing it as regularly as you can.
Having these tools available to us that are not necessarily HRT, there's so much, isn't there, that we can do to be helping ourselves through this perimenopause and menopause journey. And breath work is one of those things, but it's so incredibly at our fingertips.
Yeah, it's incredibly accessible, and I think, you know, as more and more people realise this, and there's quite a few books have come out more recently for those that want to find out a little bit more. James Nestor's book on breath, it's called Breath, actually, is excellent. It's a really easy read and one that's very accessible. Richard Bostock has got a book called Excel, which is really, really good as well. My personal favourite is the book by Patrick McKeown, The Breathing Cure, but that goes into a lot more depth. So if you're already enjoying using breath work, that's a really good one for a slightly deeper read, a slightly deeper or more in-depth read around the science around it. And for those who may be yoga teachers or yoga practitioners, Robin Rothenberg's book is excellent as well. So a few recommendations there. But actually, you're likely to find many breathing techniques and free videos on YouTube as well. So, you know, exploring that and exploring your breath and finding one that resonates with you.
Yeah, and I think just understanding that the menopause and the perimenopause is a journey, and you've got to find what works for you and what feels right for you. And for some women, like you said, Caroline, at the start, HRT isn't for them, or isn't the magic bullet, as we say. And there are loads and loads of other options available to you, and breathing is one big part of that. That is free, is accessible, and can really benefit not just your perimenopause but your well-being in all. So I'm hoping that everyone found that breathing technique that Caroline showed us through and talked us through really, really helpful. I certainly did. And I think there's tips that we can all take away from that and use day to day, certainly over the Christmas and festive period, but well beyond that into the new year. So thank you for that.
Thank you. It's good to share some different breathwork techniques, and just taking the one away that works for you, if there was one, and practicing it, because that's the other thing. As you said, it's sometimes when we try something, we just give it a quick go and it doesn't quite work. But unfortunately, there are no quick fixes in perimenopause and menopause. So taking a little bit of time to practice one that helps and get used to it, so it's there at your fingertips when you need it.